The Corpse Light by Dick Donovan. My name is John Patmore Lindsay. By profession, I'm a medical man and a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons and a member of the Royal College of Physicians, London. I am also the author of numerous medical works, the best known perhaps being How to Keep in Good Health and Live Long. I was educated in one of the large public schools and took my degree at Oxford. I've generally been regarded as a hard-headed man and skeptical about all phenomena that were not capable of being explained by rational known laws. Mysticism, occultism, spiritualism, and the like only served to excite my ridicule, and I entertained anything but a flattering opinion of those people who profess belief in such things. I was pleased to think it argued a weakness of mind. I have referred to the few foregoing facts about myself because I wish to make it clear that I do not belong to that class of nervous and excitable people who fall prey to their own fancies, conjure up shapes and scenes out of their imaginings, and then vow and declare that they have been confronted with stern realities. What I'm about to relate is so marvelous, so weird and startling, that I am fain to begin my story in a half-apologetic way. And even now, as I dwell upon it, I wonder why I, of all men, should have been subjected to the unnatural and unearthly influence. But so it is, and though it is in a sense I'm only half convinced, I no longer scoff when somebody reminds me that there is more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our philosophy. But to my story, and when it is told, the reader can judge for themselves how powerful must have been the effect of what I witnessed when it could induce a man of my mental fiber to commit to paper so astounding a narrative as the one I now pen. It is about 20 years ago that I took up a practice in the old-fashioned and picturesque little town of Brinton on Sea. At that time, there was no railway into Brinton, the nearest station being near 7 or 8 miles away. The result was the town still retained a delightful old-time air, while the people were as primitive and old-fashioned as their town. Nevertheless, Brinton was far ahead of its neighbors, and though in a purely agricultural district, was enterprising and business life, while its weekly Tuesday market brought an enormous influx of the population of the district for miles around, and very large sums of money changed hands, being the chief town of the parish, and boasting of a very curious and ancient church and a still more ancient market cross, to say nothing of several delightful old hostelries, and a small though excellent museum of local curiosities, consisting principally of Roman remains and fossils for which the district was renowned. It attracted not only the antiquary and the gourmand, but artists, tourists, and lovers of the picturesque, as well as those in search of quietude and repose. The nearest village was Highley, about 3 miles away. Between those two places was a wide sweep of magnificent rolling down, delightful at all times, but especially so in the summer. Many an ancient farmhouse was dotted about, with here and there a windmill. The down on the seaside terminated in a high headland, from which a splendid lighthouse sent forth its warning beams over the fierce North Sea. Second only in conspicuousness to this lighthouse was an old and half-ruined windmill, known all over the countryside as the Haunted Mill. When I first went to live in Brinton, this mill early attracted my attention, for it was one of the most picturesque old places of its kind I had ever seen. And as I had some aristocratic instincts and could sketch with, as my two flattering friends said, no mean ability, the Haunted Mill appealed to me. It stood on rising ground close to the high road that ran between Brinton and Highley. I gathered that there had been some dispute about the ownership, and as is usually the case, the suckers of the harpies of the law had fastened upon it, so to speak, and drained all its vitality away, after the manner of lawyers generally. The old-fashioned legal luminaries of the country were a slow-going set, and for a quarter of a century that disputed claim had remained unsettled. During that long period, the mill had been gradually falling into ruin. The foundations had from some cause sunk, thrown the main building out of the perpendicular. Part of the roof had fallen in, and the fierce gales of a quarter of a century had battered the sails pretty well to match wood. A long flight of wooden steps led up to a principal door, but these steps had rotted away in places, and the door itself had partly fallen inwards. Needless to say, this mill had become the home of bats and owls, and according to the yokels, of something more fearsome than ever. It was a forlorn and mournful-looking place, anyway, even in the full blaze of sunshine, but seen in moonlight, its appearance was singularly weird and well calculated to beget in the rustic mind a feeling of horror, and to produce a creepy and uncanny sensation to anyone susceptible to the influence of outre appearances. To me, it did not appeal in any of these aspects. I saw it in only subject matter for an exceedingly effective picture, and yet I am bound to confess that even when transferred to board or canvas, there was a certain grim suggestiveness of things uncanny, and I easily understood how the superstitious and unreasoning rustic minds was odd to a belief that this moldering old mill was haunted by something more creepy and harrowing than bats and owls. Anyway, I heard wonderful tales, at which I laughed. And when I learned that the country people generally give the mill a wide berth at night, I blamed them for their stupidity. But it was a fact that worthy and in other respects intelligent farmers and market folk, coming or going between Brinton and Highley after dark, preferred the much longer and dangerous route by the sea cliffs, even in the wildest weather. I have dwelt thus long on the haunted mill because it bulks largely in my story, as will presently be seen, and I come in time to regard it with scarcely less awe than the rustics did. It was during the second year of my residence in Brinton that a young man named Charles Royce came home after having been absent at sea for 3 years. Royce's people occupied Gorse Hill Farm, about 2 miles to the south of Brinton. Young Charlie, a fine, handsome, but rather wild youngster, had, it appears, fallen desperately in love with Hannah Trousell, who was a domestic in the employ of the rector of the parish. But Charlie's people did not approve of his choice, and thinking to cure him, packed him off to sea, and after an absence of 3 years and a month, the young fellow, bronzed, hardy, more rollicking and handsome than ever, returned to his native village. I had known nothing of Charles Royce or his history up to the day of his return, but it chanced on the very day I had to pay a professional visit to the rectory, and the rector pressed me to lunch with him. Greatly interested in all his parishioners and knowing something of the private history of most of the families in the district, the Reverend very naturally fell to talking about young Royce and told me the story, adding, "Hannah's a good girl, and I think it's rather a pity Charlie's people objected to his courting her. I believe she would have made him a capital wife." "Has she given him up entirely?" I asked. "Oh, yes. She's engaged to Silas Harthrop, whose father owns the fishing smack, the North Sea Bounty. I've never had a very high opinion of Silas. I'm afraid he's a little too fond of skittles and beer. However, Hannah seems determined to have him in spite of anything I can say, so she must take her course. But I hope she will be able to reform him and that the marriage will be a happy one. I really shouldn't be a bit surprised, however, if the girl took up with her old lover again, for I have reason to know she was much attached to him, and I fancy Charlie, if he were so minded, could easily influence her to throw Silas overboard." The little story of love and disappointment naturally interested me, for in a country town the affairs of one's neighbors are a matter of greater moment than is in the case of a big city. So it came to pass that a few weeks after Charlie's return, it was pretty generally known that, even as the rector had suggested it might be, young Royce and pretty Hannah Trousell were spooning again, and Silas had virtually been told to go about his business. It was further known that Silas had taken his dismissal so much to heart that he had been seeking consolation in the beer pot. Of course, folk talked a good deal, and most of them sympathized with Silas and blamed Hannah. Very soon it began to be bruited about that Royce's people no longer opposed any objections to the wooing, and that in consequence Hannah and Charlie would become husband and wife at Christmas. That was in about 7 weeks' time. A month of the time had passed, and the askings were up in the parish church, when one day they went forth a rumor that Charles Royce was missing. Rumor took a more definitive shape a few hours later, when it was positively stated that 2 nights previously Charles had left his father's house in high spirits and the best of health to visit Hannah and walk with her, and as she was going into the town to make some purchases. On his way, he called at the Two Wagoners, a wayside inn, where he had a pint of beer and purchased an ounce of tobacco. From the time he left the inn, all trace of him was lost, and he was seen no more. Hannah waited until his coming, and long past the appointed hour, and when he failed to put in an appearance, she became angry and went off to town by herself. Next day, her anger gave place to anxiety when she learned he had left his home to visit her, and he had not since returned. Anxiety became alarm when 2 and 3 days slipped by without bringing any tidings of the truant. On the night that he left his home, the weather was very tempestuous, and it had been wild and stormy since. It was therefore suggested that on leaving the Two Wagoners, he might have got confused when he reached the common, which he had to cross to get to the rectory, and as there were several pools and treacherous hollows on the common, it was thought he had come to grief, but the most diligent search failed to justify the surmise. Such an event as this was well calculated to cause a sensation not only in Brenton and its neighborhood, but throughout the county. Indeed, for many days it was a common topic of conversation in the Brenton weekly market. The farmers and the rustics dwelt upon it to the exclusion of other things. And of course, everybody, or nearly everybody, had some wonderful theory of his or her own to account for the missing man's disappearance. One old lady, who every week for 20 years had trudged in from the village 5 miles off with poultry and eggs for the Brenton market, declared her belief that young Royce had been spirited away, and she recommended an appeal to a wondrous wise woman, locally known as Cracked Moll, whose reputation for solving mysteries and discovering lost persons and things was very great. Ultimately, Royce's people did call in the services of this ancient fraud, but without any result, and despite wide publicity and every effort on the part of the rural and county police, to say nothing of 101 amateur detectives, the mystery remained unsolved. Charles Royce had apparently disappeared from off the face of the earth, leaving not a trace behind. In the process of time, the United States wonder gave place to something else, and accepting by those directly interested in him. Charles Royce was forgotten. Hannah took the matter very seriously to heart. For a while, lay dangerously ill. Silas Harthrop, who was much affected by disappointment with regard to Hannah, went to the dogs, as the saying is, and drank so heavily that it ended in an attack of delirium tremens. I was called in to attend him and had hard work to pull him through. On his recovery, his father sent him to an uncle at Yarmouth who was in the fishing trade, and soon afterwards news came that young Harthrop had been drowned at sea. He was out in the North Sea in his uncle's fishing smack, and though nobody saw him go in, it was supposed that he fell overboard in the night. This set the local tongues wagging again for a time, but even the affairs of Brinton cannot stand still because of the ne'er-do-well Silas Harthrop was drowned. So sympathy was expressed with his people, and then the affair was dismissed. About 2 years later, I received an urgent message late one afternoon to hasten with all speed to Highley to attend the squire there, who had taken suddenly and of reports said seriously ill. I had had rather a heavy day of it, and there had been a good deal of sickness for some time past, and it had taken me several hours to get through my list of patients. I had just refreshed myself with a cup of tea. I was about to enjoy a cigar when the messenger came. Telling him to ride back as quickly as possible and say that I was coming, I busied myself with a few important matters, which had to be attended to, so as I might be absent for some hours. And then I ordered my favorite mare, Princess, to be saddled. I set off from Brenton soon after 7. It was a November night, bitterly cold, dark as Erebus, while every now and then violent squalls swept the land from seaward. Princess knew the road well, so I gave the mare her head, and she went splendidly until we reached the ruined mill, when suddenly she wheeled round with such abruptness that, though I was a good horseman, I was nearly pitched from the saddle. At the same moment, I was struck in the face by something that seemed cold and clammy. I thought at first it was a bat, but remembered that bats do not fly in November, an owl would not have felt cold and clammy. However, I had little time for thought, as my attention was to be given to the mare. She seemed disposed to bolt and was trembling with fear. Then, to my intense astonishment, I noticed what seemed to be a large luminous body laying on the roadway. It had the appearance of a corpse illuminated in some wonderful and mysterious manner. Had it not been for the fright of my mare, I should have thought I was the victim of some optical delusion. But Princess evidently saw the weird object and refused to pass it, so impressed was I at the idea of a real and substantial body was lying on the road, notwithstanding the strange and earthly light, that I slipped from the saddle, intending to investigate the mare, when suddenly disappeared, and the cold and clammy something again struck me in the face. I confess that for the first time in my life I felt a strange, nervous, unaccountable fear. I say unaccountable because it had been difficult for me to give any explanation of my fear. Why and of what I was afraid. Now, whatever the phenomenon was, there was a hard, stern fact to face, that my horse had seen what I had seen and was terrified. There was something strange and uncanny about the whole business, and when a terrific squall, bringing it with it sleet and rain, came howling from the sea, it seemed to emphasize the uncanniness, and the ruined mill, looming gaunt and grim in the darkness, caused me to shake with an involuntary shudder. The next moment I was trying to laugh myself out of my nervousness. Princess and I, mentally argued, have been the victims of some atmospheric delusion. That was all very well, but the something cold and clammy that struck me in the face, and which may have struck the mare in the face also, was no atmospheric delusion. With an alacrity I did not often display, I sprang into the saddle, spoke some encouraging words to the mare, for she was still trembling, and when she bounded forward, the haunted mills behind me, I experienced a positive sense of relief. I found my patient at Highley in a very bad way. He was suffering from an attack of apoplexy, and though I used all my skill on his behalf, he passed away towards midnight. His wife very kindly offered me a bed for the night, but as I had important matters to attend to early in the morning, I declined the hospitality, though I was thankful for a glass or two of generous port wine and some sandwiches. It was 12:30 when I left the house on my return journey. The incident by the haunted mill had been put out of my head by the case I had been called upon to attend. But as I mounted my mare, and the groom who had brought her round from the table said, "It's a bad night, doctor, for riding. The kind of night when dead things come out of their graves." I laughed and replied, "Tom, lad, I'm surprised to hear you talk such rubbish. I thought you had more sense than that. Well, I tell you what, doctor, if I had to ride to Brinton tonight, I'd go by the cliffs and chance being drowned rather than pass down Old Mill." These words for the moment unnerved me, and I had honestly confessed that I resolved to go by the cliffs, dangerous as the road was in the dark. Nevertheless, I laughed at Tom's fears. I ridiculed him, though when I left the squire's grounds, I turned the mare's head towards the cliffs. I was in a few moments, I was ridiculing myself. "John Patmore Lindsay," I mentally exclaimed, "you are a fool. All your life you have been ridiculing stories of the supernatural, and now, at your time of life, you're going to allow yourself to be frightened by a bogey? Shame on you." I bucked up, grew bold, and therefore altered my course and got into the high road again. There had been a slight improvement in the weather. It had ceased to rain, but the wind had settled down into a steady gale and screeched and screamed over the moorland with a demoniacal fury. The darkness, however, was not so intense as it was, and a star here and there was visible through the torn clouds. But it was an eerie sort of night, and I was strangely impressed with a sense of my loneliness. It was absolutely unusual for me to feel like this, and I suggested to myself that my nerves were a little unstrung by overworking the anxiety the squire's illness had caused me. And so I rode on, bowing my head to the storm while the mare stepped out well, and I anticipated that in a little more than half an hour I should be snug in bed. As we got abreast of the haunted mill, the mare once more jibbed and all but threw me, and again I was struck in the face by the cold, clammy something. I had generally prided myself on being a bold man, but my boldness had evaporated now, and I was almost thinking my hair rose on end as I observed that the illuminated corpse was lying in the road again. But now it appeared to be surrounded by a lake of blood. It was the most horrible, weird, marrow-curling sight that ever human eyes looked upon. I tried to urge Princess forward, but she was stricken with terror and wheeling right round, was setting us towards Highley again. But once more I was struck in the face by the invisible something, and its coldness and clamminess made me shudder, while there in front of us lay the corpse in the pool of blood. The mare reared and plunged, but I got her head round, determining to make a wild gallop for Brenton and leave the horrors of the haunted mill behind. But the corpse was again in front of us, and I shrank back almost appalled as if something once more touched my face. I cannot hope to describe what my feelings were at this supreme moment. I don't believe anything human could have daunted me, but I was confronted by a supernatural mystery that not only terrified me, but the mare I was riding. Whichever way I turned, the awful, ghastly object confronted me, and the blow in the face was repeated again and again. How long I endured the unutterable horrors of the situation, I really don't know. Possibly the time was measured by brief minutes. It seemed to me hours. At last, my presence of mind returned. I dismounted and reasoned with myself that whatever the apparition was, it had some import. I soothed the mare by patting her neck and talking to her. I determined then to try and find a solution to the mystery. But now a more wonderful thing happened. The corpse, which I was still made visible by the unearthly light, rose straight up, and as it did so, the blood seemed to flow away from it in great gurgling streams. For I solemnly declared that I distinctly heard gurgling sounds. The figure glided past me, and a sense of ordinary coldness made me shiver. Slowly and gracefully, the shining corpse glided up the rotting steps of the old mill and disappeared through the doorway. No sooner had it gone to the mill itself seemed to glow with phosphorescent light and become transparent. And I beheld a sight that took my breath away. I'm disposed to think that for some moments my brain became so numb that insensibly ensued, for I am conscious of a blank. When the power of thought returned, I was still holding the bridle of the mare, and she was cropping the grass at her feet. The mill looked blackly against the night sky. It had resumed its normal appearance again. The wind shrieked about it, and the ragged scud raced through the heavens, and the air was filled with the sounds of the raging wind. At first I was inclined to doubt the evidence of my own senses. I tried to reason myself into a belief that my imagination played me a trick, but I didn't succeed, although the mystery was too profound for my fathoming. So I mounted the mare, urged her to her fastest pace, galloped into Brighton, and entered my house with a feeling of intense relief. Thoroughly exhausted by the prolonged physical and mental strain I had endured, I speedily sank into a deep, though troubled slumber as soon as I got into bed. I was unusually late in rising the next day. I found that I had no appetite for breakfast. Indeed, I felt ill out of sorts. And though I busied myself with my professional duties, I was haunted by the strange incidents of the preceding night. Never before in the whole course of my career had I been so impressed, so unnerved, and so dispirited. I wanted to believe that I was still as skeptical as ever, but it was no use. What I had seen might have been unearthly, but I had seen it, and there was no use trying to argue myself out of the fact. The result was, in the course of the afternoon, I called on my old friend, Mr. Goodyear, who was chief of the county constabulary. He was a strong-minded man, and like myself, a hardened skeptic about all things that smacked of the supernatural. Goodyear, I said, I'm out of sorts, and I want you to humor a strange fancy I have. Bring one of your best men and come with me to the haunted mill. But first let me exact from you a pledge of honor that, if our journey should result in nothing, you will keep the matter secret, as I am very sensitive to ridicule. He looked at me in amazement, and then as he burst into a hearty laugh, exclaimed, I say, my friend, you're overworking yourself. It's time to get you a locum tenens and take a holiday. It's time you got a locum tenens and took a holiday. I told him that I agree with him nevertheless. I begged him to hear me and accompany me to the mill. At last he reluctantly consented to do so, and an hour later we drove out of the town in my dog cart. There were 4 of us. As I took Peter, my groom, with me, we had provided ourselves with lanterns, and Goodyear's man and Peter knew nothing of the object of our journey. When we got abreast of the mill, I drew up and gave him the reins to Peter. I alighted, and Goodyear did the same. Taking him on one side, I said, I've had a vision. Unless I am the victim of incipient madness, we shall find a dead body in the mill. The light of the dog cart was shining full in his face, and I saw the expression of alarm that my words brought. Look here, old chap, he said in a cheery, kindly way as he put his arm through mine. You are not going into that mill, but straight home again. Come now, get in the cart, and don't let's have any more of this nonsense. I felt disposed to yield to him and had actually placed my foot on the step to mount when I staggered back and exclaimed, my God, am I going mad? Or is this a reality? Once again, I had been struck in the face by the cold, clammy something, and I saw Goodyear suddenly clap his hand to his face as he cried out, "Hello, what the deuce is that?" "Aha!" exclaimed exultantly, for I no longer thought my brain was giving way. "You've felt it too." "Well, something cold and nasty like struck me in the face. A bat, I expect. Confound them." "Bats don't fly out at this time of year," I replied. "By Jove, no more they do." I approached him and said in a low tone, "Goodyear, there is a mystery beyond our solving. I am resolved to go into that mill." He was a brave man, though for a moment or two he hesitated, but by my insisting, he consented to humor me. So we lit the lantern, and leading the groom in charge of the horse and trap, I, Goodyear, and his men made our way with difficulty up the rotting steps, which were slimy and sodden with wet. As we entered the mill, an extraordinary scene of desolation and ruin met our gaze as we flashed the light of the lantern about. In places the floor had broken away, leaving yawning chasms of blackness. From the moldering rafters, huge festoons of cobwebs hung. The accumulated dust and dampness of years had given them the appearance of cords. And oh, how the wind moaned eerily through the rifts and crannies of broken windows. If ever there was a place on this earth where evil spirits might dwell, it was surely that ghoul-haunted old mill. The startling aspect of the place impressed us all. Perhaps me more than the other two. We advanced gingerly, for the floor was so rotten that we were afraid it would crumble beneath our feet. My companions were a little bewildered, I think, and were evidently at a loss to know what we had come there for, but for some strange feeling impelled me to seek for something. Though if I had been asked to define that something for the life of me, I could not have done it. Forward I went, however, taking the lead and holding the lantern above my head, so that its rays might fall afar. But they revealed nothing save the rotting floor and slimy walls. A ladder led up to the upper story, and I expressed my intention of mounting it. Goodyear tried to dissuade me, but I was resolute and led the way. The ladder was so creaky and fragile that it was not safe for more than one to be on it at a time. When I reached the second floor and drew myself up through the trap, I am absolutely certain I heard a sigh. You may say it was the wind, I swear it was not. The wind was moaning drearily enough, but the sigh was a distinctive note and unmistakable. As I turned the lantern round so its light might sweep every hole and corner of the place, I noticed what seemed to be a sack full of something lying in the corner. I approached and touched it with my foot and drew back in alarm. The touch and sound told me it contained neither corn nor chaff. I waited until my companion to join me, then I said to Goodyear, "Unless I'm mistaken, there's something dreadful in that sack." He stooped and placed his hand on his neck, and I saw him start back. In another moment, he recovered himself and, wiping off his knife, cut the string which fastened up the mouth of the sack, and revealed a human skull with the hair and shriveled, mummified flesh still adhering to it. "Good heavens," he exclaimed, "here's a human body." We held a hurried conversation, and decided to leave the ghastly thing undisturbed until the morrow. So we scuttled down as fast as we could and went home. I did not return to the mill again myself. My part had been played. Investigation made it absolutely certain that the moldering remains were those of poor Charlie Royce, and it was no less absolutely certain that he had been foully murdered. For not only was there a bullet hole in the skull and a bullet inside, but his throat had been cut. It was a murder horrible and damnable. The verdict of the coroner's jury pronounced it murder, but there was no evidence to prove who had done the deed. Circumstances, however, pointed to Charlie's rival, Silas Hartrop. Was it a guilty conscience that drove him to drink, as did the furies who avenged such deeds impel him on that dark and stormy night into the North Sea, to end the torture of his accursed earthly life? Who can tell? The sea holds its secrets, and not a scrap of legal evidence could be obtained. But though the law declined the responsibility of fixing the guilt on the dark deed on Silas, there was a consensus of opinion that he was the guilty party. It was a mystery, but the greatest mystery of all was that I, the skeptic, should have been selected by some supernatural power to be the instrument for bringing the foul crime to light. For myself, I attempt no explanation. I have told the true story. Let those who can explain it. I admit now that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. That's by Dick Donovan, pen name of J.E. Preston Muddock, 1843 to 1934. Wonderful story. I love this guy's stories. He also did The Spectre of Rise of Bab, which I'm going to redo. And there are more, but these are my two favorites. So let's do some cards real quick and see what's going on. Let's see. So the Four of Swords is reversed. This is someone coming out of a period of like taking like a rest. They've got the Nine of Swords is reversed. So they are no longer in like a period of anxiety. Something is like they're going into a time of celebration. The Six of Wands is upright. So this is, they're not like they're coming out of rest, being more active, and then they're not anxious about something that they used to be anxious about and upset about or concerned about, and now they are having rest. So that being said, we've got that one down. I've got to do the Devil's Ghost, the Spectre Resalbabe, the Owl, the Alchemist. I want to do, probably not going to get to it today, but Dreams in the Witch House, Gods of Pagana by Dunstan Door on the Wall. And I need to redo Sleepy Hollow because that one was like needs a revamp. I want to redo Sleepy Hollow, and the other one is and then at some point I'll do more Dracula too. I started to redo that. So, you have any requests or whatever, put them in the comments. And we certainly got a lot more stories. I've been uploading like a lot of my back catalog. I want to just get them uploaded so people can listen to them, and also like that way I can clear out I had them on iCloud, but they're taking up a lot of space. So this way you guys can enjoy them, and it frees up space on my thing. And like I say, I'm going to continue narrating, and we'll go from here. If you want to get a tarot reading, the link is in the About section.